Thanks for being with us tonight for round one of Faith and Politics. Before we jump in, let me just open us in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this hour together tonight to be able to pause and step back from all the other things that go on in our day, all the other voices, and to reflect together on how we as your people can engage this political moment more faithfully. So Lord, as we do that together tonight, I pray that you bless our time. I pray that you'd be with us, work among us by your Holy Spirit for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, this is week one of what we're calling a forum on faith and politics. We are happy to be with you. This is Robin Boisvert.
Great to be with you.
Good to have you with us, man. We are coming to you from the auditorium at Covenant Life Church with our esteemed live studio audience. Good to have you with us, my friend. Let me talk a little bit about what we are doing with this whole thing, not just tonight, but why we're doing these things in the first place. First, actually, let me say what we're not doing. So this will not be a thinly veiled campaign, right, Robin? We're not going to be trying to argue or persuade for a particular candidate or even a particular party. Our goal is really uniquely as pastors, and I think as pastors at Covenant Life Church in particular. It's wonderful if others might be kind of clicking in and listening in, but really our heart is for our particular local church. And we want to lead a discussion on how we as God's people can engage this political moment in a way that's really informed by God's word. And how we can really engage politics in general, not just this particular moment, but the whole political realm, right, Robin? Yeah. In the days to come. So as we do that, I just want to be honest, I think we bring with us some pastoral concerns, right? We bring some observations that are driving us to want to open God's word together and consider some things together. And I want to just share those with you. One is, I think, a concern related to Christian discipleship, just Christian discipleship in general. The fact is we come to these things, we don't come as blank slates, right? We don't come completely uninformed. We are being formed and shaped in how we engage the political realm in this season by someone, by something. And I think maybe, Robin, this is somewhat unique historically in just the sheer volume of information, articles, media, social media that people have access to, that people are engaging with. Yeah. I don't know if you were using your iPhone in the 60s to engage all that was going on politically, right? A little bit different?
A little bit different,
yeah.
Yep.
And so I think it's probably all too easy for us as Christians to be informed by all these other voices that really are trained and they're quite good at grabbing and keeping our attention, right? That's really what the whole thing is oriented around. And maybe with those attention-grabbing voices in our ears, in our minds, in our news feeds, we might look over at our Bible, right, just laying there on the nightstand or wherever it is, and maybe it doesn't grab our attention as easily or as quickly as it might, or perhaps as it should. So I think this is an opportunity to say, hey, rather than being formed in how we engage politically primarily by all those other voices, which may be helpful, but rather than primarily being informed by, dare I say, Don Lemon or Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity or all the different people who might be speaking into our world right now in our society, what would it look like for us as Christians to pull back and say, how could we be formed as Christian disciples primarily by God's word? So that's goal number one. Any other thoughts from you on that, Robin, before I jump to the next one?
Well, I'd set my hair on fire to get your attention to put God's word first. But since my hair is long since gone, I'll just resort to cold, hard logic. There's nothing that you can do to better strengthen your heart and be a blessing not only to the Lord but to those around you than make God's word the priority. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight. When we read God's Word, and when we read it regularly, and when we try to put it together and harmonize what it has to say, in other words, doing theology, and when we are informed by history to see how other Christians have tried to apply God's truth, we can arrive at a better understanding of how to act in this particular present moment. But it all starts with God's Word, and that's what we're going to try to put first.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's true, isn't it, that there are all kinds of other organizations that, again, may be very helpful, whose main objective is to try to inform us politically in this cultural moment, right? And we'll get into this a little bit more later, but the unique calling and responsibility of the church, right, is to make and mature disciples.
That's right.
And so I think we have a unique opportunity to do maybe what only we are called to do as the church, which is to engage God's word on these topics. So,
That's right.
So we want to do that. We want to see Christians formed primarily in their political engagement by the instruction of God's word. I think the second pastoral concern would be related to not just Christian discipleship, but Christian unity. Now, let's be clear on this, right? This is not because we think Christians should be soft and have flimsy convictions and just sort of hug each other and sing kumbaya, right?
And not that we should all think alike on every issue either.
Right, exactly. But that we should be unified. Now, the truth is that we believe all kinds of things that are probably much more odd in society than some of our political convictions, right? We should be people who have deep and firm convictions about things not just as important as they are, things like sexuality, things like the nature of life and the importance of life. As key as those topics are, even though they're controversial in many circles in this moment, but we hold convictions about things that are even weirder than that, right? Our leader, so to speak, is someone who was born of a virgin who rose from the grave.
That's right.
Right? So we should be people who are comfortable holding convictions that are at odds with culture and doing that humbly but confidently as well. But I think what we've seen happen is that people who believe many of the same things there, what we might call orthodoxy, and people who even believe all kinds of secondary things in common, like I referenced, things related to the value of life, the Christian sexual ethic, who even within those realms or those common convictions, they may differ in their political judgments otherwise.
That's right.
And at times, it's all too easy for all of us to let those differences in political judgment create division and fracture relationally, right?
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we are more comfortable being around people who think like we do. And if there's variance, it can make us uneasy. But if that's a brother or a sister in the Lord, we have an obligation to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. And that means working through disagreements and just maintaining relationships through those things so that we can have an ongoing conversation.
Right.
And that's very, very important to the Lord. Our unity in Christ is a very, very high value, and we can't put anything ahead of that as long as what we're talking about is truth. We're not going to sacrifice truth.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a helpful observation you made. We're so often more comfortable just being at the kitchen tables of people who we know think like us on these things. Yeah. But I think that really gets at what's the basis of our unity, right? If I'm more comfortable in an environment where I'm with an unbeliever who agrees with me politically than I am with a fellow Christian with whom I might have some differences politically, I think that raises some good questions for me and for all of us.
It does.
We'll get into that a bit later as well. I think the last one I'll mention briefly, as far as observations, pastoral concerns, perhaps in this season, is what I would just call Christian confidence. I think fear It's so easy for it to run amok in all of our hearts. I think we see that in so many different ways in society. And I think from all ends of the political spectrum, there are different things perhaps we're fearful of, but so often fear can rise in our hearts. And when we think about our calling to be salt and light in the community, we want to bring a sort of non-anxious presence, right? We want to bring a certain confidence that's rooted in the power of God, the sovereignty and the love of God, that doesn't make us indifferent to what's going on in society at all, but allows us to engage those issues from a place of humble confidence in the Lord rather than being motivated by fear. And I think one of the ways we can help one another engage with that kind of humble confidence is by having greater clarity about who God is and the nature of how he's called us to engage in these things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's one of the things that's driving this current series that we've been in the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
The theme being that God reigns. And I'll mention just an anecdote that I asked my wife if I could share this a few weeks ago. She doesn't know I'm going to do this now, but back in, I don't know if it was 2005, 2006, when the war in Iraq was raging. I think it was around Easter time, and things were not looking good. And we actually had relatives over there. And I could tell that she was really becoming very anxious and even frightened. And I said, I think we need to go back and take a deeper look at who God is in his sovereignty. The fact that he actually is reigning and that we can trust him even in situations like this. And so we went back and did a little theological study on the nature of God, the fact that he is omnipotent, he's all-powerful, he's all-knowing, he's everywhere present, the omnis, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. And by doing a deeper dive in that, it was able to help her heart to gain a greater grip on the fact that God is indeed sovereign, and it's a benevolent sovereignty. That's why Paul could say we're not just conquerors, but we're more than conquerors through him who loved us. But we can just have phrases like that, oh yeah, the sovereignty of God, or God reigns, and then go off and live just as like the scaredy cats we were before we even said that phrase. It does take a little work to lay hold of these things, but it's well repays the effort.
Yeah, that's good. It's one thing to acknowledge that. It's another thing to live under the reality of our allegiance to him day by day. Those are regular choices. Well, so here's how we'll do this. That's sort of the why. Here's the how. We are going to try to make this engaging, in and out, hopefully set a somewhat low bar for engagement so that if you're in the midst of a busy day, if you've been overseeing online school for your kids all day, if you've been busy at work and Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting, we want you to be able to click into this on Tuesday night, hopefully get a dose of biblical perspective on how to engage these things, maybe ask a couple of questions that have been on your mind and come away with a category or two that will just inform your thinking and your engagement in that coming week. So we're going to have 30 minutes on the front end each week of sort of presentation where Robin and I will together bring something from God's Word that will hopefully help us engage in this moment. And then we'll have 30 minutes of discussion around that topic. And like I said, hopefully that gives you a chance to ask the particular questions that maybe you're sort of trying to sort out application of whatever's been presented that night. And then we're going to pray. Every night we'll pray together, and we'll let you kind of get back into your week. So as we're talking, you can text our church number, 301-869-2800. I'll get your text right here, and then at right around 7:30, maybe a few minutes before, we'll take some time to talk through those questions. So as we talk, 301-869-2800, you can text in your question. Well, tonight we want to take a few minutes to tackle politics and the church. So how do we navigate political engagement, particularly within the church? Now, before you click out, because you thought we were going to talk about some scintillating topic that's super controversial, I actually think getting some clarity on this topic will really significantly inform the way that we engage all the others in many ways. Because I think it helps us understand what is the particular calling that we have within the church, and how do we also think about our engagement with other Christians, with other people in the church around these political topics. Are there things that the Bible actually has to say about that? I think that'll really help inform us. So if you were the one who was tempted to click out when you heard that topic, this one might be especially for you. So hang out with us here for a few more minutes. I want to share tonight, I'll kind of lead out in this, but Robin's going to engage as we go, and he's going to have his Bible handy because we're going to read a few passages together. Three distinctions, I'll call them, for navigating political engagement in the church. Three brief distinctions for navigating political engagement in the church. Here's the first one. The Great Commandment versus the Great Commission. So one helpful distinction, categories to have when we think about engaging one another in the church around politics, is the distinction between the Great Commission and the Great Commandment. So we find the Great Commission in Matthew chapter 28, starting in verse 18. Robin, would you read the Great Commission to us?
Mm-hmm. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age."
So, Robin, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, in your own words, just obviously you've read the text, could you elaborate? What is the Great Commission?
Well, the Great Commission is the mandate that Jesus gave to his disciples following his resurrection and just before his ascension as to what their task should be. And the mission of the church is to make disciples. That's what the church is to do, primarily. Now, there's a lot that we are to do.
Now, when you say the church, what do you mean by that?
I'm talking about the church in its institutional nature. The church, we have church on Sunday, that's the church gathered. But we'll make a distinction between the mission of the church and individual mission of every believer who has a different calling or vocation in life. But the church, as the church, is primarily called to make disciples.
So in some ways, we're distinguishing here between the Christian and the church, right? So
right.
the gathering, the collection, so to speak, of the people of God who are represented in this moment by the apostles. Jesus comes before them based on his authority, based on his promise to be with them until the end of the age, and he gives them collectively a mission, the thing that they and the church that follows them is called to do. Well, then we also have the Great Commandment, which I think gets to what you were just speaking to, the commandment that each individual follower of Christ is called to live out. And this comes to us in Matthew 22, 36 through 40. Someone comes and questions Jesus and says, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." So Robin, can you flesh that one out a little bit for us? What is the great commandment?
Well, this is Jesus' word to us. It summarizes the law of God. The Ten Commandments summarize the law of God. Jesus distills it down even further. We're to love God with all the heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that is essentially worship and obedience. we're also to love the neighbor as we love ourselves. So there is a vertical dimension to our love, and then there is a horizontal dimension to it. And it's profound. It's not complicated, but that doesn't mean it's easy. Our goal in life is to glorify God by worshiping Him, loving Him, and serving Him. And that's going to take an effect, especially in the way that we relate to one another. So loving God and loving the other. That will take many, many different forms.
Right. And so you're getting where I was headed. If we wanted to kind of cut to the chase and say, okay, what's the so what, right? So we have a distinction here between the calling and responsibility of the church collective and then the calling and responsibility of individual followers of Christ. I think one sort of application of that is that the mission of the church as church must remain central, right?
Yes.
Which means everything we do collectively ought to be oriented around this mission that Christ has given us to make and mature followers of Jesus. So that would be the primary reason why I think we often, as a church collectively, don't delve into some of the more debated political, just applying this in a political realm. It's the reason why we don't do all kinds of other things that may be very good to do and not wrong to do, but aren't necessarily focused on that mission. And we'll talk again about this in a moment. There are certainly topics and issues, we've addressed them tonight. You mentioned a couple in your sermon last Sunday, that where the Bible is explicit and clear on, we will address. But one of the reasons why we haven't had a seminar on fracking, pro and con, or tax policy, pro and con, even though there are good reasons for that, right? For why people believe one or the other, is that, and again, I'm using an extreme example there, right? But is that we want our teaching, our ministry, our programming even, our fellowship and life together to be oriented around this mission of making and maturing disciples. So if that's the mission of the church, but then individual Christians have a calling to try to sort out, how do I love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength? How do I love my neighbor as myself? Well, there's an understanding that that's going to look different in each Christian's life.
That's right.
The way you pursue that calling based on your own relationships, your own gifts, your own abilities, your particular callings from the Lord. You and I and every person in our church is going to pursue that according to their particular calling. So I think that what that may mean for the way we engage one another politically is that not every Christian or not every fellow member of our church is going to feel as deeply or engage as deeply on certain issues and topics that may be very right and good to be concerned about as deeply as the person sitting next to them, right? Yeah. And there's a certain freedom to say, look, you, Robin, in this particular season of your life and in light of your particular callings, you may engage a certain topic, a certain issue in society or opportunity to advance the good in ways that are different than I or anyone else in our church. Is that right? Am I getting at it?
Yeah, I think, and when it comes to issues that might touch on politics, like some Christian individual believers have a real burden for the persecuted church in other lands. Right. And they'll become parts of organizations and give and promote work that will alleviate the sufferings of those. Others perhaps might be motivated by human trafficking. Now I'm talking about social issues now that really touch directly on the church and yet there are political dimensions to it, lobbying for efforts like that that would involve political activity. And so each individual Christian may feel motivated or led by the Lord to become more deeply involved and knowledgeable in certain areas, and they can be a benefit to other members of the body of Christ too. That's in addition to the fact that God has different callings for people to get them involved in different areas like medical care, even politics as a career, law enforcement, different areas that might touch on a lot of these different things, but your particular call is going to lead you in a way that will be different from other people.
Yeah.
And it's important for you to follow the Lord and the leading of the Spirit in those areas.
Good. Well, and that, I think, gets us into the second distinction I want to share. So first is this distinction between the calling and mission of the church, which is the Great Commission, the calling and commandment to each Christian, which is the Great Commandment. Secondly is, I'd say, the distinction between American liberty and Christian liberty, right? So American liberty and Christian liberty. I think most of us are familiar with concepts related to American liberty, which, by the way, we're very grateful for, right?
Yes.
We're grateful that we can sit in this building tonight and speak openly and freely about our faith and the ways that it's driving us to
You
engage
mean like
politically.
First Amendment rights?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And we're grateful for those rights. I think perhaps what Christians often aren't kind of as aware of is that we also have Christian liberties, which are liberties not to sort of behave however we want or kind of flaunt our freedoms and things like that, but that we actually have liberty of conscience, which means that our conscience and our life and our activities, our behaviors are bound by God's word and no one else, right? So, Robin, I see you turn to a passage there. You might be beating me to it. Which one are you going to? Romans or Colossians?
Well, actually, I was thinking of Galatians chapter 5 that says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another."
Right.
We I think can be frightened these days that we'll say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or be misinterpreted. And
Right.
how can I be careful that I don't want to offend anybody else, but I want to really live for the Lord? Well, you have a freedom, and you can use that freedom to love, and that's always going to be in vogue. That's always going to be approved by God. Yeah. Although it still could get you into trouble, ultimately you'll be fine if you're using the freedom that you have to serve others in love.
Yeah.
That's a small capsule statement. Paul kind of expands on it in, I think, where you might be wanting to go.
Well, there's several. I'll go to Colossians chapter 2, verse 20. It says, "If with Christ you died to the spirits of the world, why, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch," referring to things that all perish as they are used, according to human precepts and teachings. Another place where this comes up prominently is in the book of Romans, right? Paul's been laying out the gospel for 12 chapters, and then he starts applying it practically into people's lives. And there are clearly ways where Paul is very willing and eager to see the church, in a sense, have its conscience bound to believe and behave certain things and in certain ways. But there are other areas of life, life together, where he is actually eager for the church not to stand in judgment against one another. And so in chapter 14, he says, "As for the one who is weak in faith, welcome him, but not to quarrel over opinions. One person believes he may eat anything, while the weak person eats only vegetables. Let not the one who eats despise the one who abstains, and let not the one who abstains pass judgment on the one who eats, for God has welcomed him. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It is before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand." So when we talk about Christian liberty, I think basically what we're saying is what God has commanded of us, we must do. We are obliged, we are obligated to submit and obey. But we are not called to submit or obey to the expectations or demands or rules or regulations that others may want to lay upon us that go beyond what God has required. Am I getting at it?
Yep.
Okay. So I appreciate one picture of this I've heard. I think this probably came from David Helm and some of his teaching with the Simeon Trust workshops. But we'll talk about God's word like a line, and to call people to something above that line or beyond what that line says is basically to call them into legalism. It's to say you must do what God's word says plus some stuff. Well, That's bad, just so you know. The other way we can go is to call people to something less than what God's word says, which is to call them into licentiousness, to sort of smooth over the rough edges and call them to less than what God's word commands. And I think what we're saying when we talk about holding to Christian liberty is that we want to hold the line, right? We don't want to call people to less than what God's word says. We also don't want to call them to more than what God's word says. So how might, Robin, from your perspective, that principle of the freedom of Christians and Christian conscience affect how we engage one another politically?
Yeah,
Big question, I know.
Yeah, I was actually kind of thinking along slightly different lines, and because this is the politics hour,
Yeah.
I was thinking of something wouldn't quite communicate it. How are you thinking about it? Maybe I could
Well,
piggyback on that.
I think it's probably a temptation all of us have to identify certain topics or certain political issues that are clearly addressed in Scripture.
Yeah.
Right? Where in a sense the Lord would bind our conscience. But then to sort of try to then connect some dots beyond that and bind the conscience of people beyond what God's word says. So I remember when I was a kid getting I'll spare the adjectives to describe the context where I received this, but I got a Christian voter guide that not only had the Christian position on some more common, clear line biblical issues, but it had a Christian position on congressional voting districts and a Christian position on tax policy and a Christian position on certain aspects of foreign policy that, again, I would say, I think we have to be careful to sort of suppose in our conversations and engagement with one another that the Bible necessarily binds the conscience of a Christian to have a certain perspective on those kinds of issues. Now, we want to think about all those issues out of a biblical worldview, right? So that doesn't mean we think about what the Bible says about the top tier ones, then put it aside for the others. But I think we have to draw a distinction between the ones where there's a straight line and ones where there's a jagged line.
Right. I do remember back in the 1980s, for those of you that go back this far, and Van, you'll remember this, there was a political candidate for president, Pat Robertson, who was the president of CBN and a very prominent Christian leader. And many Christians were thrilled that a Christian was running for president and assumed by that very fact that every Christian should totally get behind him and vote for him because he's a Christian. And many people were very surprised when other professing believers did not get immediately behind that. But just because a person is a Christian does not mean that that person would necessarily be the best candidate. Now, they might be. But there's room for disagreement on that, and to try to bind someone's conscience by saying, you're a believer, you have to vote for Pat Robertson. Right. And there may be many reasons, good reasons to vote for him. As it turns out, he didn't get the nomination, and so it never really came to pass. But that was back in the 80s, and that was a rather new thing at the time, at least in the United States here in the recently modern era.
Yeah.
Now, as pastors, we have a responsibility to pastor all of the people in the congregation. I have my political views on things. I've been pretty much politically aware my entire life. I grew up in this area. My opinion on things might be as valuable as yours, maybe not. And on an individual basis, I'm always happy to engage people on various issues and explain why I believe the way I do. But I want to be very, very careful about that because I also wear the hat of a pastor. And I have to be cognizant that everybody that comes into this church, I want them to grow in their discipleship of Jesus Christ or become disciples. And if they come from a totally different place politically and think that, there's just one way of thinking here, then that could screen out potential disciples. We want to be very careful that we don't do that. It doesn't mean we don't have opinions, but we are very careful about sharing those. We want to be the pastors of this congregation for the glory of God and not for a particular view. Again, now we're talking about things that might be like, what's the biblical position on the Sandinistas? That was back in the 80s, that was a big deal, and I'm not really sure what it was. What's the biblical position on fracking? There are valid values that would contribute to perhaps a position on that we could gain by wisdom.
Right.
And we can have those kinds of conversations, and I think that they're important. Yeah. But those are not what we call straight line issues that the Bible speaks very clearly toward. Right. Now, if there is an issue like that, like the issue of abortion, of course, we're going to speak clearly about that.
And we will get into what I guess we'll call political triage, right? How do we as Christians size up some of these in the weeks to come? Yeah. I think what we're getting at in this distinction is not only for us as pastors, but I think for all of us in fellowship with one another as Christians, is that we in a sense, bind our conscience to God's word and not to anything else.
That's right.
So in a sense, we're saying as Christians, graciously to our other Christians, don't tread on me, right? Yeah. Here's the way the London Baptist Confession of Faith puts it. God alone is Lord of the conscience, and hath left it free from the doctrines and commandments of men, which are in anything contrary to his word, or not contained in it. So that to believe such doctrines or obey such commands out of conscience is to betray true liberty of conscience. And the requiring of an implicit faith and absolute and blind obedience is to destroy liberty of conscience and reason also.
Would you please read that again?
Sure, yeah. God alone is Lord of the conscience, and hath left it free from the doctrines and commandments of men, which are in anything contrary to his word, or not contained in it, so that to believe such doctrines or obey such commands out of conscience is to betray true liberty of conscience, and the requiring of an implicit faith and absolute and blind obedience is to destroy liberty of conscience and reason also. Well put, huh? Yeah, it's a good word. Well, I will, in the name of time, just skim over this last point because I think it relates already to the things we've been talking about. But the distinction between spiritual unity and political diversity. So we talked earlier about the fact that in Christ, every follower of Jesus and member of Christ Church is of one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, right? That's the basis of our unity. And I think one of the challenges for us in this season is that we do have political diversity. Not only political, party diversity, but diversity even within our own tribes, so to speak, and our convictions and all these things. But underneath all that, we have something kind of holding us all together, right? We have a glue that won't let us just bail on each other, which means unlike the world where we can just hit the eject button and hop into our camps and tribes, we actually have to sort some of these things out. And it's actually, I'll just speak personally, one of the things that encourages me about our church is actually that some of this diversity does exist, because I think it speaks to the fact that we do have a unity underlying it that's deeper than our political affiliations. Mm-hmm. And we're all in different places and processing all of those different dynamics and issues, and this, hopefully, conversation is part of that process. To that end, I actually want to let our Covenant Life folks know that we are we've bought a book for you. We got one for every household in the church. We will have them, Lord willing, this Sunday as folks who come in person leave. If you've been participating in the service online, we'll make a way for you to contact us so you can get your copy of it. But it's written by Jonathan Lehman, who's at Capitol Hill Baptist Church, where they face these issues quite often, I'm sure. And it's called How Can I Love Church Members with Different Politics? And I just want to read a quick story that he opens up with that I think illustrates this last point, and then we'll take some questions. He is, here, I'll just read it. It was the Sunday after a presidential election which we will have again very soon. I, Jonathan, had been teaching an adult Sunday school class on Christians and government that fall. The church, like most of the nation, was still absorbing the result of the election's unexpected outcome. And feelings that morning were raw. I began the class by talking about sympathy. I wanted to encourage members whose candidate had won on Tuesday to sympathize with members whose candidate had lost. Christian maturity, I observed to the class, knows how to both disagree with someone and yet still show compassion. An older minority woman whose candidate had lost raised her hand and said that she had not felt any sympathy from the church and that she was scared. Minutes later, a middle-aged white woman raised her hand and said she was astonished at my call for sympathy because the losing side was evil. At that moment, you can be sure, I second-guessed my decision to teach that class that morning. We'll see how Q&A goes. Maybe we'll second-guess our decision to have this forum. Yet those two women offer us something very honest, a picture of how challenging it can be to love people with different political opinions, even when they are members of the same church. That's the challenge before us, I think, in many ways, and we want to rise to that challenge and, Lord willing, meet it well over the next month.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for sending in your question. I see several here, so let me just start with the first one that came in. If you can listen and then you can bounce it back to me, you can start us off, Robin. If politics is a disputable matter, is there ever a situation in which it becomes non-disputable who you vote for? So, in other words, can there ever be a candidate that Christians should not support? Or is your vote always something that should be an issue of complete liberty? Good question.
Well, I think it should be an issue of complete liberty, but your conscience needs, again, to be bound by the Word of God. So I think it is possible to say, because my understanding of truth and the policies or positions of a particular candidate are totally at odds, that I could not vote for that individual.
Yeah.
Now, that's talking to you making your own decision. That's not necessarily you judging another person's decision.
Right.
Now, that could lead to an interesting conversation where you ask your friend, how could you vote for candidate so-and-so given his position on X?
Right.
And in that case, the conversation needs to be carried on in a Christian manner. So I may be getting ahead of things a little bit here.
No, I think you're good. I think it's a good question. It's hypothetical, obviously, so it's difficult to speak in hypotheticals. But I think what they're getting at is it possible that a certain candidate could so misalign with biblical values and principles in such obvious and apparent ways that it would mean that it was not a matter of Christian liberty who you voted for, but really Christian faithfulness demanded a certain vote.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fair question. Again, it's hard to answer in the hypothetical. But I think the way our current American democracy works, political calculations are so complex that it's hard to imagine a situation, maybe other than something like just outright religious persecution. Even there, I think it's difficult to say. But I think that's part of what makes this moment so challenging, is that there are so many people who are making this election that very situation. Mm-hmm. And I've heard this from, read a book actually, where there was a Christian who believes the Bible, believes the gospel, who cannot see how a person could be a Christian and vote for Donald Trump. And I have read resources and talked to people who cannot fathom how a person could be an actual follower of Jesus who believes the gospel and knows the Bible and vote for Joe Biden.
That doesn't leave us with, with much choice.
Yeah. So I think, it's important to weigh into these things together. And actually, I think when we have an awareness of our spiritual unity in Christ, it frees us to engage one another on these issues more, not less, but to argue and discuss from a place of of trying to help one another see the issues more clearly, understanding the teaching of God's word more clearly, rather than just calling our faith into question if one another disagrees.
Yeah, it does prompt the response that some conversation is
Yeah.
needed
Yeah.
to flesh that out a bit as to why the
Right.
person would say what he said. And there could be some very good reasons for saying that.
Right.
But it would prompt a conversation, not just an ultimatum.
Right.
Otherwise, we don't grow in unity. We don't. Well, maintaining the unity is going to be very, very difficult if just statements are made very baldly and they're not followed up, especially without any kind of attempt to understand the thinking of the other.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does raise a question, though, as to that I've heard some ask as whether we are required to vote.
So let me read the next question, because it's that question, and we just talked about this week.
Oh, is that right?
How, actually, let me pull it up. Yep. Well, yeah, it's just your question. Do we have to vote?
I'm not sure you can bind a person's conscience biblically to say you must vote.
Sorry, I just found it. Is it okay to just not vote at all if we are not happy with either presidential candidate?
I don't know if it's okay. You're going to have to hash that out with God.
Yeah.
Now, biblically, we don't find examples of that because they were not in a situation where they could make a choice. Government was imposed on people in biblical times. It's just in relatively modern times that we have the opportunity to cast a vote. And that leads many thinking people to say it is a responsibility for a citizen to do this, and to not do this is to deny one of the privileges and responsibilities of citizenship.
Yeah.
So, there is an Anabaptist tradition in Christianity that is a very thoughtful position that chooses to not become involved in anything political. But it's a thoughtful position. It's not arrived at quickly.
Right.
I'm not sure that many people that say, well, I don't like either candidate, I'm going to vote, if they've really thought long and hard about, is that really the best position to take? But at the end of the day, I think I'd be hard-pressed to tell somebody, you must vote, and if you do not, you are sinning. I don't think I would be able to say that.
I actually think it's helpful that you use the word sinning. It's kind of how we talked about it earlier this week, is I wouldn't tell someone that they have sinned because they have failed to cast a vote.
Yeah.
I think most of us have seen it as an opportunity of civic duty, of love for neighbor, to communicate our perspective on the outcome of an election. And I would sort of seek to persuade possibly from that position, but I don't believe that Scripture calls it a sin to not vote.
Yeah, it may just be utilitarian to say this, but the idea of the lesser of two evils, or someone would say the evil of two lessers, which is going to do less harm than the other.
There's all kinds of calculations.
All
like that
kinds
we're
of
gonna take into
calculations
account.
can figure into it. It's a great conversation to have with another brother or sister or a few. It's probably a question of wisdom more than it is right or wrong.
Yeah, I would agree. How should the platform of each party, Republican and Democrat, I think there's one or two other maybe, help us determine how we should vote? Party platforms. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, back in 2008, I preached a sermon here called Don't Waste Your Vote. And one of the things I suggested was from a thinker from, I believe, a Mennonite background. I pastored for many years in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. That's, of course, the home of the Amish. And that is, those are those Anabaptist roots. But they do a lot of thinking about this sort of thing, and especially in the area of war and military service. That's the big issue for the Anabaptist tradition, non-resistance, and even a step further, pacifism. But one of these thinkers suggested that an appropriate way to do political thinking is to prayerfully consider what are the issues that the individual Christian believes are most important from his study of Scripture, to list and prioritize those issues, and then to match your list of priorities versus the political platforms of the, well, here in the United States, the two major political parties. They have their platforms. So for some, the issue of health care might be very, very important. For another, the issue of the environment. For another, the issue of foreign relations. There are a lot of issues that are covered in a party's platform. But I would say, I then proffered, I said, for me, the very highest issue would be the issue of the sanctity of human life. Because if a living person is not allowed to continue to live, nothing else really matters. So I would put that right at the very top. And I remember back in 2008 when I preached that sermon, I know the majority of the people here, and the overwhelming majority agreed with me on that. I had also said that if I was living 120 years earlier, the issue of slavery would have been at the top of the list. But anyway, I did get some pushback on it. Because people felt like I was virtue signaling when I said that. But I believe I have a clear word from God on that enabled me to say that. Nevertheless, the way that I would encourage you to go about that would be to prioritize various positions that you have in terms of their importance, match that up against the political party platforms, and then go ahead and vote your conscience.
Good. What's the role of character in deciding who to vote for?
Yeah. I think character is... you want me to answer that, or do you?
You
want...
can start it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll start. Character is very important. We should vote for political candidates whose character we can affirm. Now, having said that, the greatest king in the history of Israel was David, and he had some sketchy character issues. Some say he committed adultery, but actually Bathsheba really didn't have a choice in the matter. He was coercive. That is despicable. He also wasn't much of a father. Nevertheless, he was a man after God's own heart, and he repented when he was confronted with his sin. Another man with faulty character was Saul, who did not follow David's example in that. What I'm saying here is that some people think that voting for a president is voting for the pastor-in-chief. But that's not really the role of an American president. Doesn't mean character isn't important, it is. So we have to evaluate that.
Yeah, I mean, let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room, right? Everyone's talking about that related to President Trump. I think he's the one where it often comes up. I think the thing I
But also Biden falls into that character.
Well, I was going to say,
too.
that's where I was headed, is I think even a couple of other related questions get into what's more important, character or policies. Well, policies are also a reflection of character, right? I think you pointed this out well on Sunday, that all law is moral in the sense that it's all a reflection of morality. And so a candidate's policy standpoint and convictions are just as a part of his or her character as what we might see as, more kind of outward displays. I would say both are very important. And I think the integrity and the forthrightness of our political leaders, president down to mayor, are incredibly important, whether they're spiritual leaders or political leaders or whatever, and they should weigh into our calculations.
There's one character quality, though, that I would say rises above all the others, and I believe it's the end of 2 Samuel. Someone can find out what it is, but the King James Version puts it like this: "He who rules among men must be just, ruling in the fear of God." The fear of God is, I believe, a primary character quality that I would want to see in a political leader. In other words, does that leader regard God to be the highest authority? One day, that leader is going to have to give an account before the Lord. If he or she rules in the fear of God, they're going to be in a lot better place on Judgment Day. Again, that's going to be maybe a tough evaluation for you and I to make from where we sit. We don't know these people personally. We have glimpses of them. A lot of what we know about political candidates is refracted through the medium of media. And so we get a polished version of candidates. We aren't able to sit down with them and ask them and look them in the eye and that sort of thing. So we're kind of at a bit of a disadvantage here. That's why we have to pray. We're told to pray for kings and for rulers and for those in authority, and we have to pray. And I pray for not just the political leaders that are in positions of responsibility right now, but also for those candidates. I do pray. It's important that we do that. Praying helps us to keep our hearts right, and so that we don't turn out to be more arrogant than the people we think are arrogant. Prayer automatically humbles us before God.
So we have two other questions I'll just mention briefly because I know we need to go. One of them just says, how do Christians deal with the influence of movements like Black Lives Matter, pushing critical race theory, Marxism, all these sorts of things?
Go for it, man.
Yeah. Well, we've gotten into that a little bit before, and we will be diving into that some in the weeks to come. I think we're going to try to bring some discernment between the sentiment, right? Black Lives Matter is a true sentence. Amen. There is a movement and an organization that's aligned themselves and kind of utilized that phrase that does have an agenda that in several ways is contrary to a biblical worldview. And critical race theory, similarly, I think draws on some nuggets of some things that align with things we see in Scripture, like the misuse of power, but I think it has a far too narrow framework. That's one dimension that's at work in human relationships and governments. There's also many others, and all of those need to be brought into play into how we discern what's going on in society.
Yeah, let me just say this. Slogans are not a very good way to carry on political discourse. If your political thinking is reduced or could be reduced to a mere slogan, you are very shallow. So let's accept the sentiment. I think we can all agree. My friend Todd Keeler, when he was talking to some students about Black Lives Matter, he said, "I totally agree. Now, why do they matter?" And I thought, that's a great question. And why do they matter? Because they're created in the image and likeness of God. That's why they matter ultimately. So if we just stop with the slogan, we're all going to lose. It's just not going to be satisfactory.
Yeah, good. One person asked if we could let some folks know about a certain comparison that's available of party platforms. God bless you. We're not going to promote particular organizations' breakdown of the platforms, but I trust You guys can find good resources that are out there. And we really are grateful for the engagement. I think lots of great questions tonight. I hope you'll click back in. Every Tuesday night, we'll spend an hour together. We'll do just this. We'll open God's Word on a particular topic. We'll take some time to talk, and we'll take some time to pray.
Are you going to mention any other resources tonight?
So this one
Okay.
is coming your way. I think it's especially relevant to this topic. Another one that's similar but also gets into a little bit of political triage. I keep using that phrase, but it comes up here and in this other resource. It's a book written recently by David Platt. I think it's called Questions to Ask Before You Vote or something like that.
Okay.
A couple of our elders have read it, really appreciated it. I've skimmed it and really appreciated it, but I'll bring that with me next week and encourage you in that.
Yeah, I want to thank you, members of our congregation. We have received much information and videos and different things over the last months. And I do my best to try to look at and read and view everything. So we'll be touching on some of those things that we've got. Next week, I'll be talking about the church and the state from a biblical point of view. We're going to be, as a matter of fact, if you're interested in what I'll be talking about, please read Romans chapter 12 and Romans chapter 13, and we'll be looking at that in some more detail next week.
Good.
Yeah.
Would you close us in prayer, brother?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Our Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity we have to talk about these things in a little bit more depth. And Lord, I hope that the spiritual appetites of your people have been stimulated by the very beginnings of this conversation. Thank you that we're going to be able to do this over the next few weeks. Lord, help us to think wisely and to think aright and to think your thoughts after you with regard to our moment as citizens in this country, but also as citizens of the kingdom of God. Our heart's desire is to love you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and our neighbor as ourselves. We believe that we are well positioned as the Church of Jesus Christ to be salt and light in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Oh Lord, thank you for enabling us as the church to hold forth the word of life. We understand that we are the hope of the world, that if they're going to be reconciled to you, Lord, it's going to be through the witness of your people. And I thank you for the men, the women, the boys and the girls of Covenant Life Church who are sincere disciples seeking to grow in their knowledge of you. They might grow in their knowledge so that they can love you and so we can all serve you effectively. Lord, we're unprofitable servants, but we are happy that we are your servants, your sons and your daughters. Please help us for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks, brother. Thanks for being with us.
Bye-bye.